So today's webinar is hosted by J-PAL North America and Results for America. And for those of you who are a little less familiar with our work, we can give just a brief overview of our organizations before we dive into today's agenda. So I'm thrilled to welcome my colleague, Chelsea Powell, who is the Associate Director of Local Practice from Results for America, to give us a brief overview about RFA. So Chelsea, I can hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you today. I do see that I'm unmuted. I am an Associate Director of Local Practice at Results for America. We are a national organization that has a mission of making investing in what works the new normal so that government decision makers can use evidence and data to increase the impact of the over $2 trillion the government spend each year to advance opportunities and economic mobility. We work directly with governments at all levels, federal, state, and local, to provide resources and frameworks and support to help move those investments toward evidence-based and what works, and to evaluate the impact of their work. And so we're super excited to be in partnership with J-PAL for the decade that we've existed, and also specifically on this project, and excited to be here with you all today. I am happy to share a bit more about some of our specific programs if anyone is interested in that, but we will also just follow up with some of that information after this session.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. So Chelsea is also going to be joining our panel discussion in just a minute. And I can go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm Erin Graber. I'm the Environment, Energy, and Climate Change Lead here at J-PAL North America. We're a regional office of the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, which is a global research center that's based at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. J-PAL is anchored by a broad network of academic researchers, and we partner with leaders in the public, the nonprofit, and private sectors in order to rigorously study what strategies meaningfully reduce poverty and then help to translate research into action. So on today's webinar, as I mentioned, we'll be discussing the role and the promise of randomized evaluation in informing effective, equitable climate mitigation and transportation programming. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to our panelists today. From King County, Washington, we have Carrie Seahawk, who is the county's Evidence and Impact Officer. And Carrie is joined by her colleagues, Rachel Brown, the Research Associate in Market Innovation at King County Metro. We have Ryan Dooley, the Transportation Planner at King County Metro, and Terry Sullivan, the Climate and Energy Program Manager in the King County Executive Office. So we'll be hearing from these leaders about how King County is using rigorous evaluation to guide planning and action on climate and transportation priorities on the panel. We're also joined by Peter Christensen, an energy and environmental economist from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and an affiliated researcher in the J-PAL network. And Peter's going to be speaking a bit about the role of randomized evaluation in this space, as well as the broader research landscape and the types of research questions that rigorous evaluation is well suited to address around climate policy. And then finally, Chelsea Powell and my colleague, Louise Garrity, who is the Government Partnerships Lead at J-PAL North America, will be sharing more about the free resources, the capacity building, and programming that Results for America and J-PAL North America offer to support governments in really harnessing rigorous evaluation to advance their work more quickly and effectively. So just a quick recap of kind of the agenda for today. We're going to spend about 30 minutes or so on kind of this broader panel discussion, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some Q&A with our panelists for the remainder of the call. So please feel free to share questions as they come to you during the panel discussion in the Q&A box, and we'll be kind of collecting all these questions on the side for the Q&A question at the end of today's webinar. So with that, I'll go ahead and dive into the first question for our panel. And this question is really for Chelsea as well as our King County team members. So from your perspective, what is the current landscape of climate and transportation policy in North America? And kind of what are some of the primary challenges that governments face in leveraging funding to design and launch climate and transportation programs?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off. So As shown by all of you here with us today, and I think as we all know, climate mitigation is an urgent priority for humanity, and also, for the U.S. government and government leaders in jurisdictions across the country. We've seen this through an influx of federal funding, both from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, that are providing a momentous opportunity to introduce equitable decarbonization and mobility interventions. Jurisdictions are also very interested in knowing which programs and policies are most effective, but we still have a lot to learn. This is a new space for so many of us that as the science has evolved and we've learned so much about our role in climate change and how we can mitigate it, we also need to figure out what works best. And so more research is needed to understand their impacts. And we're really excited because we see government as a key participant in generating this research, especially with the opportunity to launch these new programs and to submit applications for these funds. We're really looking to state and local governments to support evidence generation so that the future of implementing climate mitigation strategies is even brighter than it is now today, as you all are testing these strategies.
I can just add here, the landscape of climate policy has always, recent history has depended on kind of where you are, as state and local governments have kind of been the main drivers for the past decade or so, but these big federal investments are now kind of giving us a lot of shared opportunities and challenges to grapple with that are new. And here in Washington State, we've had the benefit of some really transformational climate policies at the state level. Now these are intersecting with these big federal investments. And so it's a landscape of complexity and kind of figuring out this new environment. What does it mean? Where can we prioritize our investments and time, and what grants to pursue and what concepts to develop for new programs? And so, our main challenges are really capacity, which I talk about all the time, and a lot of folks on this panel are annoyed when I talk about it all the time, but it's really about, thinking about adding new staff to develop these kind of new ideas and programs, but then also building out the expertise to design thoughtful programs, implement them, and then kind of adjust them as you go. And so, and then kind of another big challenge we have, and where J-PAL and Carrie, our chief evidence impact officer, come in, is designing programs that will actually have an impact. And so thinking a lot about a lot over the years, a lot of these programs we've been kind of designing haven't always achieved their intended impact, and so we're trying to think about spending time early in the design of programs and then basing those on evidence base and kind of thinking about evaluation early so that we're coming back to it later. So those are some of our core challenges.
And I can add specifically about the transportation industry or sector and what some of those challenges are. The pandemic revealed that there was a lot of work to be done to attract people back to public transit, but also that the transportation system that we had, and to some degree still have, was already not working for a lot of people. So evaluation offers opportunities to understand which strategies might be more and less effective for reducing emissions in the transportation sector. But I think we, as it relates to climate, need to think about the situations where increasing mobility for certain folks might actually be at odds with reducing emissions, and think about who we are asking to make changes to their lives to curb emissions and to live more sustainably, particularly considering kind of what had existed prior to the pandemic and what our kind of commuting and travel patterns look like now. So there's some challenges for us specifically when financial sustainability, climate sustainability, and then our considerations of equity are not always going in the same direction.
That's great. Hi, everybody. It's great to see so many friends in the audience. And to address the question of challenges, I think some of our challenges are really self-imposed because we have really ambitious goals that are requiring us to work in really different ways to achieve them. And as Rachel mentioned, a key element of our work is around advancing equity and contributing to better outcomes for people who we have marginalized. And there isn't really an existing playbook for this or an existing evidence base. So that means we really have to think deeply and thoughtfully and rigorously about how we think our actions are going to translate into outcomes. And then we need to plan and find the time and capacity for how we build that evidence base. And that's going to help us improve both along the way, as well as make sure we're achieving the outcomes that we intend. So it's a big challenge, but we are up to it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you all. I think it's really helpful just to kind of hear that broader context as we kind of go into the conversation for today. So, you know, I'd like to now kind of hear, Peter, from you as you know, a researcher, and then Carrie, from you as well, from the government perspective. What do you see as the role that rigorous evaluation can play in helping government leaders to address climate and transportation priorities, like the ones that you all kind of spoke to in the previous question?
So I think, you know, as Carrie mentioned, and as everybody on this call and webinar knows, we're in a very exciting moment. We have the capacity to implement at a level that the types of programs that we have not been able to implement before, and at a scale that we couldn't necessarily before. However, from the perspective of research, we're sort of moving from projections, a world where we're sort of trying to take existing information to be able to understand the potential of different types of programs, ways of reducing emissions. And of course, there are many ways of going about this. And there will be many different, there are many different dimensions of the problem and many different strategies that are being considered and sort of modeled. But now, as programs are being implemented, it's important for us to understand ex post, what did we get? You know, which programs have been effective as what we projected? Where might there have been, you know, variables or factors that we didn't understand well? Where might there be factors that, you know, lead us to much higher emissions gains than we might have thought? And what is the distribution of subpopulations that are being impacted by the programs that we're rolling out? And of course, we're going to come back again and again and again today as policymakers at the federal level and at all levels are as well, to this question of equity. What is the distributional impact of particularly subsidy programs, but also other types of programs that are being rolled out? And what this really requires is a different type of research than what we've been doing to generate the projections. Here we need to partner together and build partnerships between state and local policymakers and members of the research community in academic institutions and otherwise, to be able to rigorously evaluate what the impacts are, what the costs and benefits of different policy strategies are, and who they're impacting.
Yeah, and I can jump in on this as well, Aaron, and what role rigorous evaluation plays in helping governments address our climate and transportation priorities. You know, we've really seen across the United States an increasing application of evidence of building approaches in areas like human services. And that's leading to a lot of great successes for governments and for the people that we serve. And although our transportation and climate interventions have been rigorous in their use of data, as Peter says, there's been a lot less focus around the human behavior aspects of those interventions in those sectors. So often we're just measuring or even just really estimating inputs and outputs rather than really rigorously understanding whether our actions are leading to a difference in our communities. So applying that evidence building approach that has been successful in other areas like human services to our climate and transportation actions holds really great promise for bigger impact. I'd also say that, as we step back to think about the impact of our climate work in King County, we're realizing that our largest global impact from our local climate work actually might be through demonstrating how local action can be effective, and then sharing our learnings with others so that those interventions get taken up in places all around the country. And then we also have such a huge opportunity to learn from others, and that can lead us to much faster innovation and much quicker and larger impact through that shared learning that we do as local governments with each other.
Really quickly, another aspect of this that is pretty exciting in the sort of time that we're in, the moment that we're in right now, is that through evaluation, it gives state and local policymakers, where interventions are actually being implemented, the ability to test different types of strategies and even features of designs of intervention, evaluate, and then see what works, potentially scale or make changes then after on the basis of information from the specific context that is being studied. And we've had some success with this in residential energy efficiency programs in the state of Illinois, where through a 5-year partnership with the state of Illinois weatherization assistance program, we're able to evaluate the way that the program is functioning when we began the partnership, propose potential tweaks to the design of the program, evaluate the impacts of those, and then implement those at a broader scale. And so there's a lot of potential for ongoing collaboration here to really push and make sure that we're achieving the different types of outcomes that are desired. So there's a lot of room for innovation right now.
Thanks, Peter. And with that, I'd love to kind of now turn to Carrie, Ryan, and Rachel to kind of hear a little bit more about these types of interventions that are being implemented on the ground. So for Carrie, Ryan, Rachel, would love to kind of hear from you a little bit more about what programs you're introducing in order to kind of address some of these key policy priorities that have been mentioned, and also kind of how you're planning to measure their impact.
Or I can get us started in maybe a tiny bit more context just on our climate planning overall. For local government, we have a very thorough climate plan, and Carrie spoke to this a little bit already, but we have a lot of new programs and a lot of ambition around meeting our goals. But sometimes I jokingly call our climate action plan our laundry list, because we have 250 different priority actions, and we have dozens of focus areas. So we're not the best at focusing or prioritizing. We really are trying to do it all. And that means reducing emissions, not just in buildings and transportation, but also like things like embodied carbon or natural climate solutions or waste and things like that. So, and while we're doing that, we're trying to lead with equity and create new good jobs and prepare for the impacts of climate change. So a lot of times we're advancing multiple big goals at the same time. And so that highlights the importance of thinking about evidence and impact and what really does move the needle. But to be a little bit more specific on, and things we're thinking about right now, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about our new existing building decarbonization work. So we know that this is an area where, according to some of our recent analysis, existing state, local, and national policy has some clear gaps on how do we actually decarbonize all of these buildings, in particular residential buildings. So we do have some existing initiatives there, but starting to think more broadly about how can we design a scaled up program where we connect particularly low and moderate income households to all these new rebates and new tax credits and potential new financing mechanisms, and then kind of what type of interventions and programs really do move the needle without spending $50,000 on every single household in the county. So we spent a lot of time working with Peter and Carrie and other researchers and J-PAL partners on is it what kind of barrier can we really try and knock down? Is it really low interest rate loan? Is it a deep technical assistance? And is it something else, or is it some combination? But J-PAL and Carrie and Peter can get us start thinking about program concepts and designing for evaluation early on so that we can really test something and bring some rigor and thought to what we're doing.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to like the programmatic level, what Metro specifically is trying to do with J-PAL. Our paratransit section is working to try and improve the mobility of its users, which tend to be the most in need group of transit users in our system, both because they live with they're living with disabilities, both physical and cognitive, and the paratransit service itself is just an unfunded mandate as part of the ADA. So the options are limited to those who rely solely on paratransit. Our program is trying to integrate those users with an existing on-demand service that we have. And so in doing that, we are curious as to how this helps out our agency goals, both helping those in the areas of greatest need, being good stewards of both public funds and the environment, and trying to move from being a transit agency into being a mobility agency. So we set out early on, we knew that we were going to be working with a population that is hard to reach and a population that has limited options, and a population that it would be doesn't have a lot of interaction, I guess, with new pilot programs. So we knew that we wanted to get some expertise, leverage some existing relationships we had with J-PAL researchers. In this case, we found new J-PAL researchers, which was amazing. And we wanted to be intentional about trying to measure the impact on multiple avenues of these people's lives.
Yeah, so our agency is very practiced at using metrics that kind of describe what is happening. So think of things like how many hours of bus service are we operating? What's the ridership? Things of that nature. And we're trying to grow in the areas of describing impact. So who is using our service? What is the difference that it makes for them in their life being able to have these mobility options and what makes them choose them? So this on-demand paratransit service is an opportunity to combine some of our administrative data, for example, like the more like service hour type measurement with qualitative data to understand what is the impact of being able to make more spontaneous trips via the on-demand service, and how might that improve the well-being or just the opportunities of the customers that use our paratransit.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for kind of walking us through some of the nuts and bolts of how you're thinking about these programs and where evaluation comes in. And you've each kind of spoken about this researcher practitioner partnership. So would love to just ask the group, what does a successful partnership between government staff and researchers look like? And, what might have surprised you the most about the process?
Kick us off on this one, Erin. So I think just stepping back a little bit, I think the term evaluation can carry some really negative connotations for people, because in some cases it's been used only to take like a retrospective look at something, often a judgment, kind of a 0-1 judgment about a program. It's required a lot of resources, or it hasn't really been conducted in a way in which the research is actionable. And so in King County, we're really focused, and you've heard this from, our team here, we're really focused on investing in what we like to talk about as learning partnerships with organizations like J-PAL and Results for America that flip that script on evaluation. And we're working in co-equal teams of researchers and program staff to really integrate evaluation into the work we're already doing to build programming. And that helps us to ensure that we're learning along the way, not just retrospectively. and that the evaluative activities are really driven by the questions that are most important to our program staff and our decision makers. And anyone in government knows that it takes a ton of work to stand up or even make a tweak or a change to an existing programmatic intervention. And so we have this opportunity to build evaluation into that work up front, so that we can improve along the way, and at the end know whether the all of that effort is leading to the results that we want. And by integrating that work into integrating evaluative activity into the work, it really reduces the burden. And I think in terms of what has surprised me most about the process, I don't know if surprise is the right word, maybe delighted is the right word. You know, I've had so many experiences like with the team here, but other, employees across the county where, we've just the engagement that our staff bring to the work has been amazing. The expertise they bring is incredible. To see people's faces light up when they have an aha moment or see a result of some of the analysis that we do along the way is incredible. And through some of the work that we've been doing to engage community members in our evaluative activity, to hear some of the comments back about the meaning that has brought to them and how not only, the impact of the service has had on them, but the opportunity to provide feedback and the opportunity to be part of something that is intended to improve service for the whole community. Like that is what motivates me in my work and is just such a wonderful experience to have.
Yeah, I can build on that. I mean, I'm often working on 50 things at once. So, working with researchers in these settings can help programs, leverage existing resources, existing data. Peter mentioned weatherization and the work he's done there, and can highlight where there's real evidence, where there's not, and kind of help you bring a critical eye to your theory of change. And so, as we've been working with Peter and some other researchers over the past year or so, and with J-PAL and Carrie, I mean, it's a focusing mechanism to encourage kind of better program design in our case, because we're early in the process, and kind of preparing us to really collect the right data needed for evaluation. And maybe one thing that's a little bit surprising, not that surprising, but this becomes kind of a good sales point, sales pitch for as we're developing grant applications, as we're coming to council and asking for funding in a kind of constrained funding environment. We can show that we're thinking about evidence, thinking about real impact, and measuring impact along the way. So that can be very valuable.
Yeah, and to Carrie's point about evaluation being kind of intimidating to staff, another nice part about our partnership is that we, in framing it as a prospective, proactive effort, we also build learning into the goal of the evaluation. So rather than, for example, our paratransit project, the goal could be, we want to launch this without any hiccups, and we want to serve this many people. We can set a goal that is, we want to learn what it takes to launch this service and to have people use it. So the evaluative framework, I think, is helpful as well for setting expectations. And also, as we learn, that is part of the success of the project, whether or not it actually goes well. We have learned, or however we've defined well, learning is going to be an outcome kind of no matter what. And in terms of specific relationship with our researchers, I'm on a research team here at Metro, and it's been very helpful to work with other researchers who are coming from a kind of outside of government perspective. They've been especially helpful with helping us identify which metrics to collect and what variables we might want to track throughout the course of our study, as well as creating focus group materials and survey instruments and things of that nature, which we are not doing super frequently. So very helpful to have folks that think about those questions all the time as part of the team who actually both create and then revise materials that we create.
Totally. And I think what's contributed to the success of our relationship with our researchers is that we were kind of still in development of our program when we received this grant. We're matched with the researchers. And so being able to work with them to not only ensure that our program is well established by the time we're going to start evaluating it, making sure we're thinking about the right outcomes, the right things to look at, and also identifying that opportunity to randomize and conduct that randomized trial. That's been super helpful to have early on in the standing up of these programs.
Great. And kind of reflecting on that, I think we have a number of state local jurisdictions who are joining us today, and would love just to hear from both our King County panelists as well as Peter on kind of what thoughts or recommendations you would have for other jurisdictions who are potentially considering a research partnership to evaluate their programming in the climate and transportation space.
Yeah, I can kick us off. So I would say, focus on your strengths. Many local governments have strong performance management, measurement activities, and that's really a strength that you can build on. It also does require a bit of a mindset shift to move from thinking about outputs to thinking about outcomes and the causal impact of our interventions. The question is simply, are our activities making a difference? And my recommendation is really to get clear and specific about the outcome you are intending to impact and what questions you have about whether your programs are achieving that. You really want your questions to drive the research agenda. And we can get kind of caught up in the research design, and it can be an exciting process. And we always have to come back to, okay, what are we going to do with this information? Is this the information that we need that's going to help us drive to a decision that we can practically make? So be really clear about that. And your research partners can help you, tease that out and get more specific about it. My other and kind of related recommendation is to really view yourself as a researcher too. We can kind of come into research partnerships deferring to the expertise of academics, which definitely respect that expertise and the tools that they're bringing to the table. But as human beings, we're all researchers, and your expertise is necessary and valid to creating a successful research partnership. So think about yourself as a researcher, think about the questions that you want answered.
Yeah, and I think that when you're planning for a rigorous evaluation, it helps you think about how your program is going to impact your population, the ways that that's indicated, help you understand what your intended outcomes are. And then that helps you go to the leadership at your agency or jurisdiction, that helps you go to the communities that you're impacting and work with them as partners and involve them in the research process. And this is especially so when your target population is a historically marginalized population or some other population at the fringe.
I would just sort of echo and add a little bit on what's already been said. I mean, from the perspective of a researcher to come into a team, first of all, we view you all as researchers also. And that's a really exciting part of our job, and also, the types of partnerships that we want to develop. As a researcher, I know that I have, spent a lot of hours developing tools that hopefully can be useful, but I don't believe that I necessarily have answers or solutions, right? We're all coming together with hopefully overlapping questions. I think it's important for everybody in the research team to define what those questions are that can help advance, their agenda. But where the real magic is in these types of collaborations, and what nobody can anticipate at the beginning, is what happens around the table when, some of the when the local context and local knowledge about what has worked and hasn't in a program meets some of the methodological frameworks that a researcher or researchers are bringing, and nobody could do it in isolation. And that is really an amazing thing to observe and to see. And it also I think it makes everyone's work better. It certainly makes the research better than we could otherwise do. And what I'm talking about there is, even the design process, talking about the interventions, understanding those better. We really, I think, check each other's assumptions, refine each other's understanding, and that's a really exciting part of the process. I would also suggest, I guess, two other recommendations. One is for state and local jurisdictions that are thinking about doing something, completely different or experimenting with a new type of intervention, really considering the thought leadership impact that you want to have as part of your organization. You're having an impact on a local community, but you're also, through the platform of research that you're involved in, developing something that may be replicable in other places, or may be implementable in some other similar form in other places. And you might have a lot of impact there outside of even your local jurisdiction. So just keeping that in mind, of course, that's not your primary role or responsibility, but it can be that an incredible way to amplify the impact that you're having locally. And I think that most researchers that are coming to these types of partnerships are not coming with a defined set of questions that have to be answered. We're interested in learning about what works with you and helping, basically, through rigorous evaluation, amplify the message and the information to other jurisdictions, communicate that what is working. And I guess finally, thinking early about things like data collection and things like design of intervention. It requires some sort of planning that might otherwise be a little bit different when we're thinking about a randomized evaluation or rigorous evaluation of any kind. It does require some sort of forethought in terms of what to put into play in terms of measurement, in terms of collecting information, and the research team that is working with you can really help think about both how to collect data that might not otherwise be collected as part of an intervention, and often a lot of times resources and human resources and funding to be able to do that kind of work. So I think that just from a budgetary perspective, when thinking about the research, it's very fair to talk about the research as a separate budget from the program implementation budget, and that requires a little bit more planning, but I think it takes everything further than it might otherwise go.
Okay, great. And I'd love to kind of bring Chelsea and Louise into this conversation now. So we've talked a lot about these types of research partnerships, and would love to kind of talk a little bit now about for those state and local leaders who are interested in exploring a research partnership and building evaluation into, say, upcoming federal grant proposals like the Climate Pollution Grant Program, what are some of the potential next steps that J-PAL North America and Results for America can help folks to plug into?
Thanks, Erin. So I can kick us off here. So as we've been hearing from the King County team, planning for rigorous evaluation, we think can really position these projects well for these federal grant opportunities that you're describing. We encourage jurisdictions to connect with J-PAL and Results for America to learn more about how evaluation can be built into program designs. In addition, jurisdictions that conduct rigorous evaluations will help us build the evidence base on what works to help scale effective and equitable solutions in other jurisdictions. So J-PAL and Results for America have a few free opportunities to engage with us through our Lever program, which stands for Leveraging Evidence and Evaluation for Equitable Recovery. So the first is a virtual convening in February. This will provide government leaders with a chance to learn more about researcher-practitioner partnerships and to sort of informally connect with researchers in our network who have research interests that are aligned with your programs and priorities. You can think of this as a sort of light touch, low commitment opportunity to learn more. If you heard something at this webinar today about research partnerships and working with an academic researcher that is of interest to you potentially. We will also have an evaluation incubator. This is the mechanism through which we connect jurisdictions like King County with researchers in our network like Peter Christensen. We will have a call for applications that will open in February for government agencies to receive matchmaking as well as in-depth support to turn policy relevant research questions into well-designed randomized evaluations. Selected applicants will receive funding, technical support, including project management, research support, and training as needed, as well as connections with researchers in the J-PAL network. And then I will turn it over to Chelsea to describe some of our upcoming training opportunities.
Yeah, so all of those are great opportunities, and we also have opportunities to build some of your evaluation capacity. So if you're not sure whether you are ready for an evaluation, or you're just also interested in building some of that internal capacity to know when to do evaluations, how to design those questions, how to work with your community, to know what you want to evaluate. We do have a free training sprint coming up this spring that's focused on evaluation policy development. So this year we had 14 jurisdictions draft their own evaluation policy, and we are excited to do that again with another group of jurisdictions this coming spring. And then we'll also have some additional training opportunities in the fall that are lighter touch and just ways to engage around building these capacities, learning how to partner with researchers and all of the pieces that maybe your teams might be interested in developing as you have these opportunities through BIL and IRA for your climate work. I will also just briefly mention that Results for America has an initiative called the Local Infrastructure Hub. And cities are able to get some additional support in the application process as you look at these opportunities through that local infrastructure hub. We have 2 webinars coming up next week specific to IRA and direct pay and gearing up for climate pollution reduction grants. We'll drop the link. I will drop the link in the chat and we'll follow up with that as well. But as you're thinking about drafting these applications, to include potentially evaluation plans so that they are really strong applications so that you can pursue these partnerships, please feel free to learn more about the local infrastructure hub. But as you plug in with J-PAL and Results for America through Lever, we are happy to identify other supports for you and to work more closely with you so that more folks are able to be evaluating the impact of their programming, and so we can sort of grow this broader understanding of what works when it comes to climate.
Hey, Chelsea, I just wanted to clarify whether the additional support was just available to cities or cities, counties, and counties too, because I know we have some county colleagues on the call too.
So the webinars are, I believe, city focused, but there are resources on the website. So if you go into the localinfrastructure.org and you can pull some of the sort of best practices and other tools that we've developed in a broad partnership. We're just one of many partners that contribute to that program. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Louise, for that overview. That's super helpful. And we'll also share kind of the links that have been shared out in the chat afterwards to all participants, just so you have access to those. Make sure that you're able to stay in touch and let us know what you're interested in engaging with us on. So we'd love to kind of enter into the Q&A session now with the audience. If you haven't already, please go ahead and submit any questions that you have through that Q&A function. And I'll go ahead and kind of kick us off with one question that I know has been top of mind. I think it's kind of generally, how do you determine which types of evaluation are most critical to pursue? So I'd love to kind of hear, Peter, from you and how you're kind of thinking through how to prioritize among so many different types of programs that are getting off the ground. And then Louise, kind of from the J-PAL side, how how we think about prioritizing some of these opportunities that are coming into us as well.
Yeah, great question. So I think a lot of the researchers who are out there and involved in this work, particularly in the climate arena, are really thinking about where are there sort of underlying mechanisms, often behavioral mechanisms when we're talking about, working with economists or other social scientists, where may there be behavioral mechanisms that aren't really well understood that could have potentially a very large impact on emissions reductions or on poverty alleviation or equity impacts of climate programs. So I think in that case, it's the researchers' sort of interests in terms of prioritizing are very much aligned with a lot of state and local governments who will all want to understand where there might be something that we haven't understood well before that can make a big difference. Now, the researchers' perspective in terms of the way that we prioritize things is going to be based on a lot of times on evidence that's out there in the academic literature or in research networks versus what might be understood by a jurisdiction on the ground. And this is where we really become complementary in our co-prioritization of research questions when we develop a partnership. So, but I think everybody is really interested in, what, how a program might impact, emissions reduction behavior in ways that we didn't understand before.
And I'm happy to chime in. I think that what Peter described, I think echoes the way that we think about prioritizing research projects within J-PAL and for the purposes of the evaluation incubator. To add a little bit more information in terms of the process and sort of how we do that, we have an academic review board who considers our applications and sort of where the research questions fit within the academic literature. So we're really looking for, as Peter said, projects that both answer real policy priority questions from jurisdictions and that will contribute to the general knowledge on sort of certain topics. We have review criteria that's available on our website, and we're sort of happy to share that if folks are interested in the kinds of questions and what our review board is considering.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Peter. And I think there's a couple of questions that have come up around community engagement as well. So I think this question, perhaps Carrie, for you as well as for you, Peter, is kind of from the King County perspective, how are you working to engage communities themselves in evaluation and evidence building? And I think, Peter, a question for you is also around how you and researchers are thinking about helping communities learn to evaluate their own programs. And this could even be from, the perspective of an internal evaluation and not from outsiders.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's really important. And one thing that I want to lift up here that I'm a little bit humbled to just be recognizing now is that diversity of our teams in this work is really important, particularly when we're engaging with community. And the diversity of our teams isn't really reflected in our team here. So I sort of missed the mark on that one, but it is really important. So I wanted to definitely raise that. And it's critical, I think, to engage community in all aspects of the evaluative work. So really starting from understanding and engaging with community around what are the outcomes that are important to them. Those are the outcomes that we should be thinking about evaluating and measuring. Engaging community around what are the interventions that they think are possible, practical, would be helpful, meet their needs, really engaging them in the solutions process. And then, all the way through to when we start to develop learnings and getting results, having community help you interpret those results is really, really important. A lot of the research results we get back without that community context and understanding, it's really hard to understand what those results mean. So, for example, if you see an intervention, if you were doing an intervention and you notice that intervention led to people using healthcare more, what does that mean? Does that mean people are getting sicker and so they need more healthcare, or does it mean they're getting better access to healthcare? It's that kind of interpretation and community context that's so valuable and important. And, you know, at every step, we want to be looking at, you know, and Peter mentioned this at the outset, the differential impacts that our interventions can have on different populations. In some cases, when we institute an intervention, it can actually widen gaps, and that's not what we're trying to achieve. And it can often be hard to measure the impact on small populations because the numbers are small. So really engaging communities and understanding, interpreting results, understanding the impact, understanding outcomes that are important to them, it's critically important.
Very well said. I'm not sure that I have too much to add there. I would say that from the researcher's perspective, in these types of engagements, especially at all stages, but especially at the outset, we do a lot more kind of focus group work and work as much as possible to understand the community perspective, because there's so much that can be missed when we begin to develop a particular intervention or a research design. And so that's just absolutely essential. I guess a sort of separate part of the question was revolved around kind of developing capacity for internal evaluation. And this is something that I think the research community has in mind all the time, that the types of methodologies that we develop, we're always sort of thinking about, does this lend itself to being able to be implemented with, you know, a smaller budget in a different place at a different time, this sort of research design that we might be developing. And a lot of times we're sort of thinking about contributions and innovation in that regard. We really want to push the frontier of rigorous evaluation to make sure that we're getting the emissions reductions, for example, in this case, that are expected. But we also want to sort of develop the methodologies that then could be implemented by others in other contexts, and have those be refined also by local communities and jurisdictions. So that's really something that we bring to this work, and it's something to discuss in the types of partnerships that we develop. Is it possible to do this somewhere else in the absence of a research engagement or partnership?
And another question is really looking more specifically at equity in this space. So how do we incorporate equity and climate justice into program design and evaluation? And how do you know if a program is equitable if the program is not actually targeting a specific population? So would love some thoughts and perspectives both from you, Peter, as well as from the King County team.
Yeah, we have a lot of formal frameworks for understanding the distribution of impacts of interventions on different subpopulations within a given state or local jurisdiction. And those can be brought to bear. I guess that I'll just use this opportunity to point out that those are also always require assumptions, and they'll always have limitations. And so this is an area where it's very, very important to understand maybe there are impacts on populations that weren't measured, and what is being left out. We should be asking those questions all the time. And in particular in the climate space, you know, there's a lot of focus right now, and needs to be even more, on what is underlying or creating obstacles to the take up of different programs that are being implemented around the United States. We really need to understand that, even if full populations have access or are eligible for a given program, that does not necessarily mean that all subpopulations will take it up. There are lots of barriers to that kind of access, and that's a huge set of research questions that actually we're engaging with King County on right now in certain types of programs, but that we need to take up as a broad and engaged research community.
And I don't have a good answer to the question. That's why I work with Carrie and Peter and J-PAL, but just highlighting that, to Rob's question also in the chat, like with Justice 40 and other kind of initiatives that focus investments on a geography, but not necessarily a specific household, I think it highlights the need for evaluation. So if we're going to say, these are our Justice 40 census tracts, these are our low and moderate income census tracts, and we're going to run a bunch of big programs there, usually it means we're spending more money per household because they're low income households. Again, highlighting the need for knowing if we're making an impact. But all those kind of things just, are a better example of why you should work with J-PAL Lever and get it right.
Great, thanks. And I think we probably have time for just one last question here. So Terry, you had mentioned that there's kind of this laundry list for many climate teams of possible programs and approaches. And so kind of a question for you and for others, what are possible programs kind of with high interest from communities as well as from agencies with maybe a lot of unknown factors, right? So where would more evidence be especially helpful here?
And the one that comes most to mind, as I mentioned, we have a equitable building decarbonization initiatives, but we hear a lot from community as we're doing climate justice, outreach and thinking about what our strategies should be, working with communities, is that it's not just about, paying someone to replace their heat pump or their water heater with an electric one, but about a bunch of other complementary investments that make their lives better. And so a lot of the times when we're designing programs, we're thinking about, yes, how can we help this household transition to clean electricity and get off fossil fuels, but also how can we connect them to existing resources that, are here in Seattle, we have a utility discount program. We have weatherization services that the state offers or the federal government offers. So, and then figuring out when those work and how they can work best, because we're serving a lot of people, 2.3 million people across King County. So it's about connecting people to additional resources where they're available, and then figuring out where your best bang for your buck is to get them connected to those resources and to act.
Great. So I know we're pretty much at the end of the hour here. I just wanted to spend the last minute just to say thank you so much to our fantastic panelists for participating in this great conversation today. And a huge thank you to all of you who have joined us for the conversation and for the thoughtful questions. So we'll follow up shortly with our contact information as well as the links to the resources that we provided throughout the webinar. And we'll reach out again in about a week or so with a recording of the conversation as well. So as we had mentioned earlier, we'd love to hear from you about ways that we can collaborate together. So with that, thanks again, and I hope everyone has a great evening.